Time now for an update on the day's business news. Well, as he faces a tougher than expected fight for re-election, Emmanuel Macron has signalled he could water down his plan to reform France's pension system. To discuss this and more, I'm joined by Yuka Royer from our business desk.
Well, Sharon, he wants to raise the legal retirement age to 65 from the current 62. But as he returned to the campaign trail, Emmanuel Macron said that he was ready to be flexible on this, even suggesting to hold a possible referendum on the issue. His rival Marine Le Pen wants to keep the retirement age at 62 and even lower for some. Catherine Viet takes a look at how much their plans could cost French taxpayers.
Pension reform is a hot topic as voters consider the platforms of Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen. Macron wishes to raise the retirement age to 64 or 65 years old, while Marine Le Pen proposes keeping it at 62 and lowering it to 60 for those who started working young. Two opposing views which will have drastically different impacts on state finances. Macron says his proposal could bring about 9 billion euros into the state coffers in 2027, but a French think tank believes that sum would be closer to 7.7 billion euros. The reason? Macron is counting on people working longer, along with high employment.
Il y a 1,3 milliard d'écart qui correspond surtout à un surplus d'activité qui pourrait être entraîné par cette réforme, plus de personnes qui seraient en emploi, un taux d'emploi qui est de plus en plus élevé, notamment chez les seniors aujourd'hui. Ce n'est pas de la mauvaise foi dans le calcul, c'est plutôt un optimisme qu'on retrouve assez régulièrement dans les chiffrages des candidats à la présidentielle.
In contrast, Marine Le Pen says her proposal to keep the retirement age the same and lower it for some would cost the state 9.6 billion euros a year. However, one study says the cost would be 26.5 billion euros, almost 3 times higher.
Quand on commence avant 20 ans, d'après la réforme de Marine Le Pen, on finit à 60 ans, quoi qu'il arrive. Et ces personnes-là, elles sont finalement plus nombreuses, potentiellement, que ce que Marine Le Pen a estimé. Et donc, à long terme, en fait, cette mesure va coûter beaucoup plus cher que ce qu'elle avait prévu.
Le Pen's campaign stands by its figures and says it uses a different calculation to determine the number of people eligible to retire at 60.
Inflation in the United States has hit a fresh 40-year high in March, with prices rising 8.5% from a year earlier. In an effort to lower prices at the pump, the Biden administration has lifted a ban on summertime sales of gasoline with higher ethanol content. The measure will allow American drivers to keep buying fuel that contains 15% ethanol as opposed to 10%. Critics say allowing its use would not have a major impact on cost and that it could be bad for the environment. It has been banned in summer months because it can contribute to smog in hot weather as it evaporates faster. Let's look at the markets now. Shares on Wall Street fell following the new inflation data. Here in Europe, trading started pretty flat this Wednesday, with all major indices down in negative territory, but by a very small amount, especially in Paris and London. Asian shares were mostly up earlier this day. Today, the inflation figure from the US pretty much in line with expectations. Tokyo's Nikkei bouncing back strongly after hitting a 4-week low in the previous session. Now, as the West cut economic ties with Russia over its invasion of Ukraine, China's trade with the country rose nearly 13% in March from a year earlier. Overall, bilateral trade between the two was worth $11.7 billion US. On a quarterly basis, it jumped 30% compared to the first quarter last year. Beijing has called for an end to violence, but has refused to call Russia's action an invasion and criticised Western sanctions. Argentina is one of the countries with the highest inflation in the world. In February, prices rose 52% over the year. Monthly inflation for March is expected to be above 6%. The country recently avoided another default by agreeing a deal with the International Monetary Fund to restructure its $45 billion debt. People took to the street in Buenos Aires to protest at soaring prices, as well as to hand out food and essential goods to those most in need.
No matter how much we produce, we are still poor, poorer and poorer, because inflation is eating away and pulverizing the salaries of our comrades.
Bread and milk are what every kid needs, and they're leaving us without those things. They're leaving us without access to what is essential, milk and bread.
Red-hot inflation around the world, but some countries obviously affected far worse than others.
Another Tico Royer from our business desk. Thanks so much for that update. We are crossing